Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for this invitation to come here and share with all of you some of my grandfather's philosophy and his vision for the world. I would like to congratulate the town of Niagara Falls for accepting compassion as a way of life in this wonderful town. And I hope that this will be pursued with vigor. Compassion is one of the 5 pillars on which my grandfather's philosophy stands today. He believed that we have to be compassionate, we have to be loving, understanding, respectful, and appreciating people. So it's a very important aspect of his philosophy, and his vision was that one day we would be able to create a compassionate world. He called it Salvatore, which means a world where we would do everything for the good of all. Not just a majority of the people benefiting from it, but everybody benefiting from the policies of the city or the country or the world. And so he wanted a world that was really compassionate and understanding. But to be able to create this kind of a world, we need to understand his philosophy of non-violence. And unfortunately, everybody who has studied this philosophy has looked at it only from the perspective of political conflicts. And because he used it in India to gain independence for India, and Dr. King used it in this country to gain civil rights for his people, and in every other place in the world where they used the philosophy, it was always for political conflict resolution. So it kind of got branded as a way of resolving political conflicts, and people started looking at this philosophy as a weapon that they can use when it's convenient or discard when it's not. Grandfather said that this philosophy is not a weapon. It's not like a jacket that you can put on when you need it and take it off when you don't. It's something that you have to learn to live with and make it a part of your life. It's only then that we can really understand what nonviolence is and how we can live it in our daily life. We are today controlled by a very materialistic world. Everything is materialistic, everything is about gaining for the self, for ourselves, and individualism and materialism has become the 2 cornerstones of modern society. And that has made us very selfish and greedy and self-centered. And so everybody is trying to amass wealth for themselves. It's kind of a survival of the fittest type of policy that we have here. And so some people benefit and rise and become rich and powerful, and some people are left marginalized. And this should not be the case. We need to create a world where we can all live with respect for each other and understanding for each other. He always believed that we don't want to have a relationship with people that is based on tolerance. And yet today in our world, we emphasize the word tolerance, and we teach children to tolerate diversity and so on. And yet he said that this is a very negative thing. What we need is respect between people. Tolerance means that I can tolerate somebody, I don't need to respect that person, I don't need to like that person, but because I can't do anything about it, I just tolerate them and keep. And that is where we are in our relationship with each other, not only in this country but all over the world. That we tolerate diversity, but we don't respect diversity. So we need to learn to respect diversity and understand people and appreciate them. It's also important for us to understand his philosophy of nonviolence. I learned this when I was a 12-year-old boy and I was living with grandfather. And one of the things that I did, I was going to school and I was coming back from school one day. I had a little pencil in my hand and decided I deserved a better pencil. This is too small for me to use. And so without a second thought, I just threw the pencil away because I was so sure grandfather would give me a new pencil when I asked him for one. But that evening when I met grandfather and asked him for a new pencil, instead of giving me one, he subjected me to a lot of questions. He wanted to know how the pencil became small and where did I throw it away and why did I throw it away, and on, and I couldn't understand why he was making such a fuss over a little pencil until he told me to go out and look for it. And I said, you must be joking. He said, you don't expect me to look for a little pencil in the dark? He said, oh yes I do, here's a flashlight. And I went out to looking for that pencil and I think I spent about 2 hours searching for it. And when I finally found it and brought it to him, he said, now I want you to sit here and learn 2 very important lessons. The first lesson is that even in the making of a simple thing like a pencil, we use a lot of the world's natural resources. And when we throw them away, we are throwing away the world's natural resources. And that is violence against nature. And the second lesson is that because in an affluent society we can afford to buy all these things in bulk, we overconsume the resources of the world. And because we overconsume them, we are depriving people elsewhere of these resources, and they have to live in poverty, and that is violence against humanity. And that was the first time I realized that all of these little things that we do every day, consciously and unconsciously, it's become so much a part of our nature and our life that we don't even realize we are all committing violence all the time. Then he made me draw a genealogical tree of violence. He said the only way you will understand non-violence is when you understand what violence is and in what forms we commit violence all the time. And every day before I went to bed, I had to put down my experiences of the day in their appropriate places on that tree. And the tree was violence as the grandparent, and physical violence and passive violence as the 2 branches. And every day before I went to bed, I had to analyze and examine everything that I had experienced during the day and put them down on that tree. The physical violence is something that we all understand because it's so physical and it hurts and we see it all the time. But passive violence is something that we don't even know about. And the only way I had to determine whether this was physical violence or passive violence was to ask myself the question, if somebody were to do this to me, would I feel hurt by it or would I be helped by it? And if I came to the conclusion that it would hurt me, then that would be passive violence. And when I began to do this introspection, it was a form of introspection, to find out how I was contributing to violence, to find out my own weaknesses. And once you find out your weaknesses, then you can do something to change them. But if we live in denial and say, well, I don't have any weaknesses, I don't do any violence in society, we will never change. So he made me do this, and within a few months, I was amazed that I was able to fill up a whole wall in my room with acts of passive violence. The physical violence didn't grow very much, because there's a limit to what you can do physically. But the passive violence grew endlessly. And that is when he explained to me the connection between the two. He said, we commit passive violence all the time, every day, consciously and unconsciously. And that generates anger in the victim, and the victim then resorts to physical violence to get justice. So it is passive violence that fuels the fire of physical violence. So logically, if we want to put out that fire of physical violence, we have to cut off the fuel supply. And since the fuel supply comes from each one of us, we have to become the change we wish to see in the world. If we don't change our habits and our attitudes and our behavior, we will never be able to create compassionate cities or we create peace in the world. So it's very important that we look at this, we look at our weaknesses and transform those weaknesses into strengths. He used to insist when we grew up with him that we have to continuously make an effort to become better. He said going to schools and getting an education and all that is just part of the process of becoming better. That is the knowledge part of it. You get knowledge. But what you have to do continuously is make an effort to become a better human being. And to do this, he said, every morning when I wake up, I had to tell myself that I am going to attempt to be better today than I was yesterday. And then I had to work towards becoming better. And to do that, I had to make a list of all the things that I considered to be my weaknesses. And then start working on those weaknesses and transforming them into strengths. That's the only way we can become better human beings and learn to do good things in life. His concept of working with people and helping people was also determined by this kind of attitude of his, of being understanding and concerned. He said that charity should not be motivated by pity. It should be motivated by compassion. And the difference between pity and compassion is that we walk out into the streets and we see a hungry person there and we immediately take out $1 or $2 and drop it into the can. And we feel we have done our good deed for the day and walk away from it. We don't know whether that person is using that money to buy drugs or to buy cigarettes or alcohol or going to buy food. We don't know. We don't know what he's going to do. But we know this much, that that person is going to be dependent on charity forever. And he said if we work out of compassion, then we won't just give the person some money and walk away from there, but we will stop to find out why is this person not capable of taking care of himself or herself? What kind of strengths do they have that can be used to make them stand on their own feet? And then help them realize that strength. And that requires a lot more commitment. We have to commit our time and our energy and our effort and our expertise to achieve this. And that is what part of his philosophy was. His philosophy had the component which he called trusteeship and constructive action. What he meant by trusteeship is that each one of us has a talent that we think that we own, and therefore we exploit that talent for our own personal gains, to achieve whatever our ambition may be. He said we don't own the talent, we are trustees of the talent. And as trustees of the talent, we should be willing to use the talent for other people as much as we use for ourselves. And that is sharing. Sharing constructively. As I said earlier, it has to help the person realize their own self-worth and their self-respect and be able to stand on their own feet and not be dependent on society or dependent on charity forever. So that is what constructive action in the philosophy of nonviolence is about. And we did this once when I was living in India, and I don't know if any of you have been to India, but if you have been to big cities like Bombay and Calcutta and Delhi, you'll find many millions of people who are living on the sidewalks. And they just have nothing at all in life, and the whole families are living there on the sidewalk. The government is not able to do anything about them, and people ignore them, and they just continue to live out on the sidewalk. And one day, this was way back in early 1970s, with some friends when I was working as a journalist in India, with some friends I persuaded them, I said, let's try Gandhi's philosophy of trusteeship and constructive action and see if we can help some of these poor people who are living on the sidewalks. So about 6 of us got together and we went out and spoke with these homeless people. It took us several months of daily dialogue with them to get their confidence. You know, they had been exploited by so many people who came for political reasons to get their votes or something, and then they forget about them. So they were suspicious of everybody. So it took us several months to get their confidence, and once we did, we started speaking to them and studying their situation. And we realized that what they needed was economic stability. And once economic stability was achieved, we would be able to do other things for them. So we brought about 700-800 people together, and we said that we are going to create an economic program for you. But since you are the problem, you have got to be the solution also. And you got to get involved in this. And to get you involved in this, we said we're going to ask you to do something that's ridiculous. And that is put aside a coin every day, collectively, to create a fund that we can use to establish an economic program. Now, we could have gone to a big charity and asked for the money and created everything and gave it to them. But then they would get into the impression that we can just ask for whatever we want and these people will bring it to us. We didn't want to create that kind of attitude there. We wanted them to realize that they can do things for themselves. So asking them to put aside a coin was a really ridiculous idea, because they were so poor they didn't know where the next meal was going to come from. And we told them, we don't know how you're going to do this, but you decide. If you have to work extra hours, do that, or if you have to sacrifice something, sacrifice it. but you decide how you're going to do it and start this fund. I was amazed that within about 18, 19 months, they came back to us with the equivalent of $11,000. And with that money, we bought them 10 second-hand textile machines and set that up in a little tin shed in their village. And we sent back about 80 of them to go and run this factory round the clock. Now they had no idea about how to run a business, and they didn't know anything about production, marketing, and all of these things involved in running a business. We had to help them and train them. And as they became confident of taking over, they took over the management of the factory. But they ran this factory from 1972. By 1976, they had 10 factories with several hundred machines. And almost all of the people who had contributed to that fund had come back. They also continued saving, small saving, the habit we put into them. By 1979, they opened their first cooperative bank in the city of Bombay. And that bank today has 8 branch offices and total assets worth nearly $2 million. And through the bank, they are now helping other people with small loans so that they can start businesses and stand on their own feet and achieve things. So that is the kind of program that Grandfather talked about, that we should all get involved in creating. What we were able to do is, once we gave them that economic stability, they were able to provide for themselves. Today, those people have changed completely. Their lives have changed. Their children went to schools and colleges and got degrees, and they came back as teachers to start schools in their village. They came back as doctors and are serving their own medical needs. So they that one little push that we were able to give them helped them rebuild their self-respect and self-confidence and have been able to achieve things for themselves. So this is what we need to do more and more everywhere, so that we can create a society where everybody can live a decent life and not have the disparities that we have today of the very rich and the very poor and nothing in between. I started this program of teaching nonviolence in the US about 30 years ago. And I have an institute which is now running in Rochester. It's called the M.K. Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence. And when I was actively teaching there, one of the things that people kept asking me is, you speak about this, but we haven't seen it. We don't know what it looks like, and we need to know what we can do and how we can do it. So I decided to start a Gandhi legacy tour of India. And I identified 10 different programs, started by individuals. And today, over a period of about 30 years, they've changed the lives of millions of people in India. And I take these groups of people, and they are all students and regular people from society, and anybody who's interested. They come on the tour, and we go and visit these programs, and and see how one person can make a difference there. I want to share with you a couple of those very briefly. One of them is called the Barefoot College. And the Barefoot College was started by a graduate from the Indian Institute of Technology who came out of his very prestigious institution. And he could have gotten a very well-paying job, but he told his parents, he said, before I settle down and take a job for myself, I want to go out and work for the poor people in the village for 1 year. And then I will settle down. So his parents agreed and allowed him to go for a year. And he went to this village and he saw that the village people had the ancient technology which had been discarded by the modern world. And he said there was something really very useful in the old traditions. So he revived those traditions and he brought together the women of the village and he taught them how to make solar panels from scrap material, from things that they picked up from garbage. And it's a 6-month course. And he teaches these women, and the first batch of women learned this and went out and electrified their villages, and their status rose. Because he found that the women in the villages suffered the most from poverty. Because they were oppressed by poverty, and they were oppressed by their husbands, and they were oppressed by having to take care of their children and provide for them. So they were the worst oppressed among the poor people. And by giving them this boost in their prestige, they became providers of light. They became the engineers who could erect these solar panels and manage them. So their status rose in life. And he was encouraged by this, and he made this a regular program. So he still has the 6-month program. He went to that village for 1 year, and now it's more than 35 years, and he's still there in that village. He hasn't left it. And he runs this 6-month course there, and it came to the notice of the United Nations. And a few years ago, the United Nations asked him if he would consider teaching some of the African and Latin American poor women. And he agreed, and now he has a batch of women from all parts of Africa and all parts of Latin America. And they all come there and live together. And the funniest thing, or the most intriguing thing, is that none of them can speak each other's language. So their communication is only through signs and color coding and such. But it's beautiful to see how they all get along together. It's really an international community. Last year when we went there were about 33 different countries represented there. And they were all getting along beautifully and learning these things. There are many other programs that he has started from the solar energy, teaching children and so on. But it's a fascinating place to see what one person achieved in a matter of 30 years. The other program that I am very fascinated by is a program of micro loans that one woman started, and the organization is called SEWA, S-E-W-A, that's the acronym, and it stands for Self-Employed Women's Association. Seva also in the Indian language means service. So it provides both these things. But she came from a very affluent family, and she saw the poverty among people, and she decided to do something about it. And she started giving them small loans from her pocket to start a little business and, become a fruit vendor or vegetable vendor or something and earn some money from that. And then the demand grew and she couldn't cope with it, so she got them introduced to the bank, her family bank, and the bank obliged for a while, but then banks are not really interested in these small loans. They are more interested in making big money. So they started making it very difficult for these women to get loans. So one day this delegation came to Ela Bhatt, the lady who started this program, and pleaded with her, said these banks are not giving us money and we are finding it very difficult. So what can we do about it? And one of them suddenly piped up and said, well, why don't we have our own bank? And Ela Bhatt laughed at this and she said, you people don't even know how to sign your name. How do you expect to start a bank? So they said, oh, that's no problem. We'll sit here all night. You teach us how to sign our name. And we will go and get the forms. And they did that. They sat around the table all night and they learned how to sign their names. The next day they went to the government office and got the forms to open a cooperative bank. And today they have this bank, flourishing bank. It's serving 9 million women all over the country, and it's still growing, and they have branches now in Afghanistan and many of the neighboring countries. All of this started by one woman, and again in 30 years achieved this tremendous progress. So these are things that are very inspiring and things that we need to do so that we can create a society where people live in love and respect and compassion and understanding of each other. And it's not impossible to achieve, but it requires sacrifice. And we need to make that sacrifice to be able to do this. So these are some remarks that I wanted to share with you, and I hope that Niagara Falls, the town of Niagara Falls, will one day be a beacon for the whole country of how people can live in love and harmony and respect with each other. I wish you good luck and thank you very much for giving me this privilege to be with you today.
Again, we want to thank Mr. Gandhi for that story. We do have some time if any. Right up front.
So, you told us a lot of the things that we can do as individuals. I'd ask, in the current situation in this country, are there some ways that you would suggest that we can work for more social change and sort of in either regional or national ways and banding together for some real change?
Yes, I think we can do it. There are many people who are doing it in this country. We have to learn to think small. We want to change the whole country and want a huge, big thing, and the change needs to come overnight, and that's impossible for us to achieve. We have to think small, do small things, and that will grow eventually, and people will be inspired to bring about the change. So, like grandfather always insisted, we have to set ourselves goals that we can achieve. When we set ourselves goals that we cannot achieve, then we get disheartened and give up the program. So there are various things that we can do in this country, but small ways in which we can transform. One of the things that we have started here, and it doesn't really address the issue of poverty, but it addresses the issue of understanding. There's a lot of misunderstanding between people who are incarcerated and people outside. We have the tendency to brand them as criminals, and they're not human anymore, and they become the dregs of society. And to change this, I started a program in the prisons, a simple dialogue between outsiders and insiders. We sit together for a whole day, about 25 insiders and 25 outsiders, just chatting like we are doing here in the room, talking to each other and eating lunch with each other, sitting at the table. The first time we did this, these big, hefty prisoners started crying. There were tears streaming down their cheeks. And for a moment I was taken aback. I said, have I done something to insult them? And I asked them, I said, I'm sorry if we did anything to... and they said, no. They said, we've never been treated like human beings. Nobody has ever come to shake our hands or talk to us like this. And that was a tremendous eye-opener for me. And so we've started this, and we do it regularly, as regularly as the authorities will allow us. But it's an ongoing program. So these little things that we do every day makes a difference. And there are a few people who have come out of prison and they've become changed people, and they have joined us in trying to transform society. So we need to do these little things. One of the big issues that we face today is civil rights. And I think the mistake is ours, because we depended entirely on the law to achieve understanding and acceptance. The law cannot force anybody to respect a person if they don't want to. A law can enable people to be together in places like this, but no law can make one person respect the other person if they don't want to. And I think that is where we are stuck today. We have tolerance of each other, but we have no respect for each other. And it's when we learn to respect people as human beings, then we will be able to, really achieve that integration. And we need to, learn to respect people at all levels, not just people who are educated and affluent, but people who are not affluent and not educated. And we have to bring them up in society. So it's, the principles on which relationships are built in the philosophy of nonviolence is respect, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation. We have to respect ourselves and respect each other and respect our connection with all of creation. We think that we are individuals and we can do whatever we like and it's nobody's business. we are not individual, we are not independent people. We are all interconnected and interrelated. And it's only when we respect that, that we will understand who we are and what we are and why are we here on earth. We are not here just to while away our time from birth to death. We are here for a purpose. And at the very least, our purpose in life is to make this world a little better by our existence than we had found it. And if we all do that, then we will understand the purpose of our life. And then we will be able to accept each other as human beings and not identify people by the labels we have put upon ourselves. Today we have so many labels to identify people that we have forgotten that behind those labels there is a human being. So we've got to remove all those labels and just look at each other as human beings, respect each other as human beings, and then we will appreciate our own humanity.
A couple of quick questions. You had mentioned this prison program. What is the name of that program?
We just call it prison dialogue.
Okay.
It's done through the Gandhi Institute in Rochester,
Is that Rochester,
New York. Yeah,
That
just
was
around the corner.
didn't want to be, I didn't want to presume that it was from New York State. The other thing that I wanted to ask you was, you mentioned 2 of the 8 different individuals who had made a difference, simple people. Where could I find the list? Or I'd like to read up on the others as well.
Well, we are in the process of making a website and getting all this organized. But in the meantime, if you are interested, you could write to me. My email is my first name, Arun, at totalnonviolence.org. So if you write to me, I will get all the details sent out to you.
thank you, sir.
Yes.
Last question. I viewed a film last Saturday night about a priest in Spain who eventually was murdered, who worked with the poor. And after he was murdered, a person who came to find him said that he made me a person. That's one of the things that I wanted to mention. The other is this world of scarcity. If we can only remember that power to instead of power over is what we're here for. And that's, thank you. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you. Yes.
Just a personal question. How many aunts and uncles did you have?
How many?
Aunts and uncles and cousins.
Family tree.
I just wonder about your family.
That is, it's so broad now that I've lost count of them. Grandfather had 4 sons. And
That's enough.
the 4 sons together had 14 grandchildren. Now 8 of us are surviving, the others are gone. And we each have, I have 2, a son and a daughter, and between them they have 4 children. So it's growing and I'm losing count of them.
Is it on? I have a question. When it sounds so much like all the things that you describe really get established in a small way with relationships. And I see so often people divided by fear or not seeing somebody else except by a label.
Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit to that whole thing of being afraid or fearing someone who may be different?
Yes, certainly. Because of the circumstances we have chosen to live by, and again I go back to materialism, and that creates this tendency to fear other people. The more we have, the more we are afraid that somebody is going to steal things from us and take things away. So, and then it's exacerbated by the politicians who also keep on stoking fear to be in power. So all of these things add up to controlling people through fear. And we take it a step further when we control our children through fear. Every time as parents we threaten our children with punishment if they don't behave, we are controlling them through fear. So in non-violence, it's not controlled through fear, but it's controlled through love. And I want to share with you, I said about parenting and how violence has crept into our parenting. I grew up in a family that's totally non-violence. My parents believed in non-violence. They practiced it at home and outside. So when my two sisters and I were growing up, we were not punished when we misbehaved. My parents did penance instead. Depending on how serious the offense was, the parents would fast for a day or 2 days. They would feed us, they would sit at the table, they would talk to us, and they would say that they are fasting because they were not good parents, they didn't teach us the right way of behavior. By taking the responsibility on themselves, they were able to teach us about love and about understanding each other. And we made it a point that we were never going to do things that caused them to fast. I want to share one more story. This happened when I was 16 years old. And I had just come back to South Africa after living with grandfather and learning all those important lessons. And we were living on an ashram that was about 18 miles outside the city of Durban. In those days it was out in the wilderness. All around us were sugarcane plantations. And our neighbors were far and wide, scattered all over the farmland. And the nearest neighbors were children from the laborers, farm laborers. So when we were growing up, we wanted to go to movies and all that, and that could only be available in the city. And in those days, driving 18 miles into the city to go and see a movie was not feasible. It was a very expensive proposition, especially because my parents had adopted voluntary poverty. So whenever we got a chance, we would grab it. And I remember it was a Saturday and my dad had to go to town to attend a conference. And he didn't feel like driving that day, and he asked me if I would drive him into town, and I jumped at the opportunity and said yes. And since I was going into town, my mom gave me a list of groceries that she needed. And on the way into town, my dad reminded me of all the little chores that had been pending for a long time, like getting the car serviced and oil changed and all that. And he said, since you have the whole day to yourself, will you please attend to this? And I said, okay. And when I dropped him off at the conference venue, he said, at 5 o'clock in the evening, I will wait for you outside. Come and pick me up and we'll go home together. And I said, fine. And I rushed off and I did all my chores and bought all the groceries and found that I had time to make the matinee show. So I went straight to the movie theater, leaving the car in the garage with instructions to do whatever was necessary. And I got so engrossed in a John Wayne double feature that I forgot the passage of time. The movie ended at 5:30.
Oh, no.
And I ran from there to the garage and got the car, and by the time I reached where my dad was, it was almost 6, 1 hour late. And he was naturally wondering what happened to me and pacing up and down. And so the moment I came there, he asked me the question, why are you late? And instead of telling him the truth, I was so ashamed to tell him I was watching a John Wayne double feature that I lied to him and I said the car wasn't ready, I had to wait for the car. And I didn't realize that he had already called the garage. And when he caught me in the lie, he said, there's something wrong in the way I brought you up that didn't give you the courage to tell me the truth. And you felt you had to lie to me. And I've got to find out where I went wrong. And in order to do that, he said, I'm going to walk home 18 miles. I'm not coming with you in the car. This was after 6 in the evening. It was already getting dark. Much of those 18 miles were through sugarcane plantations, dirt roads, late night, no lights. I couldn't leave him and go away. So for nearly 6 hours, I was crawling behind him in the car, watching him go through the pain and agony for a stupid lie that I uttered. And I decided there and then that I was never going to lie again. So that is the power of nonviolent parenting. We have to start at that level to instill in us love for each other and understanding for each other rather than fear. What we do today is we are making them afraid, and they grow up to believe that people must be controlled through fear. And it just keeps growing at every level.
Any other questions? Thank you again. All right. We're going to do a couple of things, change things up a little bit here. We have a break coming up in a few minutes. Stand by for that. Before we get there, we want to introduce a new project that you'll find some materials about in your folders, so I'll bring someone up in a second to do that. And then we're going to fill you in on how the second part of the day is going to work. So to introduce this new project that we're excited to work with, that I think dovetails nicely with what we've heard about today, is Liz Zalowski, the Executive Director of Leadership Niagara.
Wow, how do you follow Mr. Gandhi? But I think we have a really good initiative to share with you that's going to answer some of the questions that were just asked. So we're proud to partner with Leadership Niagara and the Levesque Institute for Civic Engagement, Impact and Renew, to launch a social movement, Halt Hate. Halt Hate is a 24-hour commitment, and we're hoping everyone in this room joins us in that commitment, where we will launch a day with no hate, to halt hate. That day is April 2nd, and we invite you to join us in that. So what is it? It is really 24 hours of practicing no hate, to inspire others, to consciously seek to understand, to practice respect for one another, to stop committing those passive acts of violence, and to come together and begin as a community to halt hate. So between now and April 2nd, we invite you to make a commitment and take a pledge. You will see in your packets there's a pledge card. And you can do that today while you're here. At the end of the day, I believe we will be taking some photos of individuals. To make that pledge to halt hate and to join us on April 2nd. We want to flood social media with this movement. We want to see images flooding every social media channel that are of individuals who have pledged to halt hate for 24 hours. And if you think about it, what can that 24 hours do, right? It's 24 hours, becomes 48 hours, becomes a week, a month, a year. And this woman right here, I see your name tag, Vicki, you asked, what can we do? This is what you can do. You can begin. We have to stop waiting for everyone else to make the change we want to see in the world. We need to be those agents of change. And this is where it begins. So we invite you to join us. There is a pamphlet, one-pager in your pamphlets that tells you a little bit more about Halt Hate and what you can do. So please join us in taking 24 hours to halt hate. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. So we're going to move forward with the instructions for the second part of the day, and to do that I'm going to bring up Professor Mitchell Allegra from Niagara University's College of Business and member of the Planning Committee to fill you in on what we're doing next.
Good morning. Since we're going to be moving into the other space for the next part of our conference, we decided we'll give the instructions first and then take a break, and then that way you can find your seats and food and get started in the conversation. So we'll explain it now. I'm part of the conference committee, and as we were meeting, we were on a conference. You know, what really is a conference? So I like to go to the dictionary. When I went to the dictionary and looked up conference, it said discussion or consultation about a matter that is important. A discussion or consultation about a matter that is important. People coming together to confer. What do we typically do at conferences? We come, we sit, we listen, we leave. Not today. All right, today we want to have a true conference. This conference theme is about deepening community. We are the community. We're not the entire community, right? But we are a part of the community. Whether you live in Niagara, whether you work in Niagara, whether you're getting your education in Niagara, whether you play in Niagara, we're part of the community. And as we heard, as Mr. Gandhi set the tone for our conferring together, you know, that we truly need to respect and embrace diversity. That's why you have little stickers, right? And are all colored stickers on your name. So we're looking at different sectors of the community. Compassion is caring in action. That is up to all of us. It's not about government taking care of things. It's not about human service agencies taking care of things. It's not about schools taking care of everything. It is all of those and more. Every part of